Hi everyone, this is Professor Tom Green with a short video about my own journey through the world of academic grading in higher ed, that is assessing and assigning grades to college students. For reasons that will become clear later on, this presentation is called The Glass Cabinet in Eindhoven. So back in the late 1980s as an undergraduate, I went to school with the idea of becoming a high school teacher. And in my education classes, we learned how to use an overhead projector and how to make transparencies and other useful stuff like that. How to use a thermofax machine, remember those? We learned how to decorate a bulletin board, how to use classroom manipulatives, and we learned the educational theories of the big names like Piaget and Erikson, and we learned how to write student learning objectives using Bloom's taxonomy. But one topic that never came up, one area where we received absolutely no guidance in all those years of teacher training, was the subject of grading. It's not that anybody was avoiding the topic or hiding anything. I think it was just that everybody assumed that it would be obvious or whatever, and so it never really came up. So when it came time for me to teach my first college class in the early 90s, I did what most people do. I made up a grading system based on the systems that I knew, the same kind of system I had been graded on during my time in public school system. I had different categories of things I wanted students to do, and I assigned percentages and points. Then at the end of the term, I sat down and crunched all the numbers until I got a final grade that processed out of it. But of course there were all kinds of problems right away. I had all the problems described by Feldman's book with the distribution and weights of the grades, producing results where the final grades didn't reflect the student's mastery of material. Assigning all those grades and deciding how to weight them did lead to inequities and wonky results. And at the end of the term, after all that work, I wound up tweaking the grades anyway, mostly upward for students who I felt deserved a higher score. So I used versions of the point system and percent system for quite a while, but fairly early on I came across an article about holistic grading rubrics. I'd love to give the reference the credit for this idea, but the original article is long since lost. But the idea of the holistic system is that during my many years of teaching, I have observed that certain behaviors, such as coming to class and doing the reading, lead to better student mastery of the material. So this holistic rubric gives me the ability to motivate students toward engaging in those specific behaviors, and it is structured in a way that allows me to disregard spoiler grades that would pull a student's overall grade unfairly high or low in the point and percent system. It does at least have the advantage of taking some of the potential bias out of grading by linking grades to concrete behaviors. But I've never been completely happy with the system either, even though I used it for many years. It still requires a lot of judgment calls. It still incorporates things like attendance and promptness that are not directly related to mastery of the course materials. And most of all, it's basically impossible for students to know what their grade is at any given moment. The flexibility and lack of transparency are two things that go together in this kind of scheme, but it was a sacrifice I was willing to make for many years until I had a kind of a life-changing experience. I should also mention that I do not use these holistic grading systems anymore, mostly because in the end, after I looked at my numbers, I found they didn't produce the equitable results in my classes that I was looking for. So in 2016, I went on an exchange trip to Summa College in Eindhoven in the Netherlands. I got to visit the college, that's what it looks like, and observe some classes and meet some of the students. Like NECC, Summa College is a two-year school, and a lot of the students are earning certificates in trades, which is what led to the aha moment that I had. And one of the classrooms that I visited was a workshop where students learned how to operate computerized milling machines. These are machines that cut complex machine parts out of solid blocks of metal. And the way the professor explained the class to me was that he took me to a glass case, a lot like this one, over on one side of this giant classroom full of industrial machines. The shelves inside the glass case contained different machine parts. And the professor pointed to one shelf and said, if you can make these objects, you earn this kind of certificate. Then he pointed to the next shelf and said, if you can make these objects, you get this other kind of certificate, and so on. And partway through his presentation of these machine parts, it dawned on me. These machine parts on the different shelves are the learning outcomes for the certificate programs. But instead of being TSW objectives written in a syllabus, they are actual physical objects that the students could all see. It was clear to students from the first moment they walked into class what they were expected to do. And the final assessment wasn't a test or a paper. It was a review of the parts they made to see if they met the specifications. Students could try again any number of times, and things like attendance and participation didn't matter because the only standard of measurement of their success was their skill in using the milling machines. This is a few years ago, and I thought at the time, if only I could make this grading in my English class this concrete, transparent, and consistent. And it took me a few years to really get a handle on how to make this work. But I think that last year and going forward with some of the ideas from Feldman's book, I finally hit on a way that works for me. So the way that I see a lot of teachers design a course is that they start off with activities or class exercises they developed or adapted, and they kind of say, this worked before, or the students really like this, and that's the major criterion for selection of that activity or whatever. Then when it comes time to connect those activities to course objectives, the teachers sometimes struggle to do that. The approach I've worked out begins with the question, what specific skills or content do the students need to know in order to go on to the next class or the next school or the world of work? And by know, I don't mean that they've just been exposed to it, and maybe they got it, maybe they didn't, but rather knowing means demonstrating mastery of the skill or content in a summative assessment in the class. A lot of us walk around with these lists, with a list of these benchmarks, I call them, in our heads informally. Like, for example, I know that students in English 101 should not leave the course without knowing how to quote a source correctly. But making the list of outcomes explicit is like putting the machine parts into the glass cabinet for everyone to see. It not only helps you concretize your standards for evaluation in the course, it also makes it possible for you to interrogate those standards by yourself or with colleagues and to make them available to the students. Then, based on Feldman's advice, students have the opportunity to practice these specific skills in targeted, ungraded assignments. Students who have already mastered the specific skill can move on to the assessments. Students who need more practice can have as much low-stakes practice as they need. And this simplifies the feedback process, because it's possible for me to refer students to specific benchmarks that their practice work is not demonstrating, which gives them the specifics they need to fix it. Then on the assessment, students get unlimited attempts. A lot of the time, students have to fail first before they can really see where their deficiencies are. And since my goal as a teacher is for students to master the skills and not to catch students with a gotcha on things they haven't learned, this makes the assessment into part of the learning process. And only the highest score counts for the final grade. If students can demonstrate their mastery of the skills or content I'm looking for, then there's really no need for unnecessary practice or other busy work. So this slide has an example of some of the benchmarks I developed for an assessment, an essay assignment that is, in an English 102 class. These are the criteria for a grade of B. Above this are the criteria for a grade of C and a grade of D, and below this is the criteria for a grade of A. And they're all similar and written in sort of parallel structures so that they can see this progression of how things change from one grade to another. So you can see that these benchmarks are concrete things that allow me, in giving feedback, for example, to say, you haven't yet shown mastery of benchmark B3 with your source quotes. And that makes it so the grade reflects the student's mastery of the skills involved, and the student gets the information about what they should work on to raise the grade. If the student has questions about what exactly benchmark B3 means, then we can have a conversation about that, or go over examples in class, or I can provide examples of good work, or all of these things. And in the end, it demystifies the process of grading for students. This benchmark system allows me to collaborate with students in understanding exactly how their grade was derived, and in learning the difference between the C benchmarks and the B benchmarks, for example, they come to understand the expectations of academic writing as a whole. As a side note, something that would be possible with these benchmarks that I intend to try out in the coming semester is to have students evaluate their own work using the benchmarks before they submit it to me. So, for example, if a student wants to claim a grade of B, then they need to mark in their own papers the specific place where they have organized according to a logical plan, or modified or paraphrased a source, and so on. And if they can't find a spot in their paper where they have done that, or if they mark a spot and I disagree that the example they've flagged actually reflects mastery of that benchmark, then we have a conversation and the student can go back and fix it. Now, some people watching this video might be thinking at this point, isn't this just Bloom's taxonomy dressed up with different language? But I think there's a key difference, and that is that Bloom's tends to be used to link your outcomes and objectives to activities that the students perform. So the connection between the activities and the mastery is kind of assumed. In terms of our glass cabinet metaphor, the thing in the cabinet would be a description of a process for producing a machine part rather than the part itself. The benchmark system, in contrast, links the outcomes directly to the grade, the assessment. And by providing multiple attempts on the assessment, it allows students to demonstrate mastery directly rather than hoping that an activity will do the job for you. And then finally, once you've got a grading system that works for your subject material in place, you have to educate the students about how it works. It's astonishing to me how deeply embedded students are in the point and percent system that we all went through in public school in the US. You could show them your grading rubric like this and show them videos and explain it all until you're blue in the face, but you can't really expect them to understand it in the abstract. Most students still only learn how the system works when they submit an assessment and don't get the grade they expected. But the nice thing about multiple attempts is those early failing grades actually then become part of the learning process. And the only grade that ultimately matters is the one they come out with at the end, which is a reflection of their highest level of achievement in the subject material. So this is the point in the presentation when I would usually ask for questions, but I can't do that obviously in a video. But look at my email in the school's email system. Feel free to email me your questions. I can talk about grading and assessment all day, and I'm always happy to have that conversation, so please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you.